You did not pick up your phone because you needed to. You picked it up because your mind has been trained to reach for it. Not once, not casually, but thousands of times. Every scroll, every tap, every tiny hit of distraction has been engineered to keep you coming back. So this is not just a bad habit. This is not laziness, and this is definitely not a lack of discipline. This is conditioning. Your attention was studied, your impulses were mapped, and your brain was quietly rewired to crave interruption. But in this video, you are going to see exactly how that happened, and more importantly, how to take your mind back. There is a chemical in your brain that was designed to save your life. It was forged across millions of years of evolution, a precise neurological instrument calibrated to drive you toward food when you were starving, toward shelter when you were exposed, toward connection when you were alone. It was the engine of human survival, the biological signal that said, move, seek, act, live. That chemical is dopamine, and it has been stolen from you. Not violently, not obviously, not in a single moment you could point to and say, there, that is when it happened. It was taken slowly, quietly, in the space of a decade, through screens and notifications and algorithms and products that were designed by the most intelligent engineers on the planet, with the most sophisticated psychological research ever assembled, to commandeer the exact mechanism your brain uses to decide what matters. You were never supposed to be able to resist them. They were built precisely so that you could not. Here is what this audiobook is about. It is not about telling you to put your phone down. You have heard that before. It did not work. Not because you are weak, but because the advice was aimed at the symptom and had no understanding of the mechanism. This audiobook is about the mechanism. We are going to go inside the neuroscience of dopamine, what it actually is, what it was designed to do, and how it was systematically redirected against your own interests. We are going to trace the exact architecture of the trap, how it was built, how it keeps you inside it, and what happens in your brain every single time you reach for the screen without meaning to. And then, with the same precision, we are going to map the way out, not through motivation, not through willpower, through understanding, because the trap was built on your ignorance of its own design. The moment you see the mechanism clearly, it begins to lose its power over you. That is what this work is for. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The molecule of more. What dopamine actually is. Almost everything you have been told about dopamine is wrong. This is not an exaggeration. The popular understanding of dopamine, the one that circulates in wellness articles and social media posts and casual conversations about addiction, is a simplified, distorted, and functionally misleading version of what the science actually shows. The most common version goes like this. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. When something feels good, when you eat something delicious, when you receive a compliment, when you check your phone and find a notification, your brain releases dopamine. Dopamine makes you feel pleasure. Pleasure is what you are chasing when you reach for the screen. This version is wrong, and the error is not cosmetic. The error is the reason that most attempts to change dopamine-driven behavior fail, because you cannot fix a system you do not understand. Here is what dopamine actually does. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of anticipation. This distinction was established through decades of neuroscientific research, most significantly the work of neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz and his colleagues, who spent years studying the dopamine neurons of primates in response to reward cues. What they found dismantled the pleasure model entirely. Dopamine does not spike when the reward arrives. Dopamine spikes when the reward is expected. In Schultz's experiments, when a monkey received an unexpected reward, a drop of juice delivered with no prior signal, the dopamine neurons fired. But once the monkey had learned to associate a specific cue with the reward, something remarkable happened. The dopamine spike shifted. It moved backward in time. Instead of firing at the moment of the juice, it fired at the moment of the cue, the light, the sound, the signal that predicted the reward was coming. The dopamine was not responding to the pleasure. It was responding to the possibility of pleasure. And when the predicted reward failed to arrive, when the cue appeared but no juice came, the dopamine neurons did not simply return to baseline. They dropped below it. They fired a negative signal, a signal of disappointment, of unmet expectation, of something was supposed to happen and did not. This is the architecture of the trap. Dopamine does not make you feel good when you get what you want. Dopamine makes you desperately want, and then punishes you when the wanting is not satisfied. You are not chasing pleasure. You are chasing the anticipation of pleasure, and the anticipation is always one step ahead of you, always just out of reach, always promising that the next notification, the next scroll, the next click will be the one that finally delivers. It never does, because the delivery is not the point. The seeking is the point, and the system was built, both by evolution and by modern technology, to keep you seeking forever. There is another piece of this architecture that is essential to understand. Dopamine operates in two distinct pathways within the brain. The first is the mesolimbic pathway, sometimes called the reward pathway, which runs from the midbrain to the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. This is the pathway most associated with motivation, craving, and the anticipatory drive. When this pathway is activated, you feel the pull, the urge, the sense that something important and satisfying is just one action away. The second is the mesocortical pathway, which runs from the midbrain to the prefrontal cortex, the executive, decision-making, long-term thinking region of the brain. When this pathway is functioning properly, it acts as a filter and a governor, evaluating whether the reward being sought is actually worth pursuing, weighing short-term pleasure against long-term consequence, and applying the brakes when necessary. Here is the critical problem. These two pathways are in competition, and the mesolimbic reward pathway, the craving system, is older, faster, and neurologically more powerful than the prefrontal governor. In the environment your brain evolved for, this imbalance was not dangerous. The rewards that triggered the dopamine system, food, sex, social connection, physical safety, were genuinely important. They were limited in availability, and they required real effort to obtain. The craving was proportional. The satisfaction when it came was genuine, and the brain returned to equilibrium naturally. That environment no longer exists. The environment you live in now has been engineered to flood the mesolimbic pathway with artificial, unlimited, effortless dopamine triggers, while simultaneously doing nothing to support the prefrontal governor that should be managing the response. Your ancient craving system is being attacked by 21st century weapons, and it was not built to defend itself. Chapter 2. The Architecture of the Trap. How it was built. The dopamine trap was not an accident. It was not a side effect of technological progress that no one anticipated. It was not an unfortunate byproduct of innovation that well-meaning engineers failed to foresee. It was designed intentionally, with full understanding of the neuroscience it was exploiting. To understand how the trap was built, you need to understand one concept above all others: variable reward. In the 1950s, the American behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner conducted a series of experiments with rats and pigeons that would, decades later, become the foundational blueprint for the most addictive products ever created. Skinner placed animals in boxes fitted with a lever. When the animal pressed the lever, it received a food pellet. At first, the animals pressed the lever when they were hungry, received their reward, and stopped. Predictable, stable, controlled. Then Skinner changed the design. Instead of delivering a pellet every time the lever was pressed, He programmed the mechanism to deliver a pellet only sometimes, randomly, unpredictably. The animal had no way of knowing whether the next press would produce food or nothing. What happened was not subtle. The animals became obsessed with the lever. They pressed it compulsively, relentlessly, far beyond hunger, far beyond any rational need for the reward. They pressed it when they were full. They pressed it when they were exhausted. They pressed it hundreds of times in a row, receiving nothing, and continued pressing. The unpredictability of the reward, the variable schedule, produced a compulsion that the predictable reward never had. Skinner called this variable ratio reinforcement. And in the 70 years since his experiments, neuroscience has explained precisely why it works. When the reward is certain, the dopamine system calibrates. It learns the schedule. The anticipatory spike adjusts to the known pattern. The urgency diminishes. When the reward is uncertain, when every press of the lever might produce nothing, or might produce something extraordinary, the dopamine system cannot calibrate. It cannot settle. The anticipatory mechanism stays in a state of permanent elevated activation, because every single attempt carries the possibility of the jackpot. The uncertainty is the addiction, not the reward, the uncertainty. Now look at your phone. Every time you open Instagram, you do not know what you will find. It might be nothing interesting. It might be a photo that makes you laugh. It might be a notification that someone you care about responded to something you said. It might be a piece of news that changes your understanding of the world. It might be a video that moves you in a way you were not expecting. You do not know. You cannot know until you look. This is not an accident of design. This is the design. The infinite scroll, the feature that removes the natural stopping point of a page end, was explicitly modeled on the mechanics of the slot machine. Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, stated publicly that the platform was built around the question, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? The answer they arrived at was the exploitation of a vulnerability in human psychology. The dopamine-driven need for social validation delivered on a variable schedule. He described it as a social validation feedback loop. The like button is a lever, your feed is a slot machine, and your dopamine system, ancient, powerful, and completely unequipped for this environment, is sitting at that machine, pressing the lever, waiting for the jackpot that the machine was specifically designed to never quite deliver. But the trap goes deeper than social media. Every major digital product in the modern attention economy, every streaming platform, every news application, every messaging system, every video game designed in the last 15 years has been built on the same foundational understanding of the dopamine system. The autoplay feature on streaming platforms removes the moment of conscious choice between episodes, the moment in which your prefrontal cortex might intervene and say, "It is late, I have things to do tomorrow, I should stop." Autoplay eliminates that moment entirely. The next episode begins before the decision can be made. Push notifications do not deliver information when you need it. They deliver interruptions calibrated to create the sensation that something important has just happened, activating the dopamine anticipation system and pulling your attention away from whatever task required sustained concentration. The red notification badge, the small numbered circle on the corner of every app icon, is a direct visual trigger for the mesolimbic pathway. It communicates, reward is waiting, something is there, do not miss it. None of these features were designed for your benefit. They were designed for your engagement. And engagement, in the language of the attention economy, means the continued and compulsive activation of your dopamine system in the service of someone else's revenue. This is the architecture of the trap. You are inside it right now. The question is not whether you were caught. The question is whether you now understand how it was built. Chapter 3. What the trap is costing you. The true price of stolen dopamine. The consequences of a hijacked dopamine system are not limited to wasted time. This is the part that most conversations about screen addiction fail to reach. They stay at the surface, the hours lost, the productivity reduced, the sleep disrupted. These are real, but they are not the deepest damage. The deepest damage is neurological, and it is cumulative. The first and most significant cost is the destruction of your baseline. Dopamine, like all neurochemical systems, operates on the principle of homeostasis, the biological drive to maintain equilibrium. When the dopamine system is subjected to repeated, intense, artificially elevated stimulation, the brain responds not by accepting the new elevated state as normal, but by reducing its own sensitivity to dopamine in order to compensate. This process is called downregulation. The dopamine receptors in the brain, the cellular receivers that detect the presence of the chemical and generate the sensation of anticipation and drive, begin to reduce in number and in sensitivity. The brain is attempting to return to balance by making itself less responsive to the stimulus that is overwhelming it. The result is a new and lower baseline. What once felt interesting now feels boring. What once felt exciting now feels ordinary. What once produced a genuine sense of motivation and engagement now produces nothing. The technical term for this state is anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure or motivation from activities that would normally generate it. And it does not feel like addiction. It does not feel like a problem with your phone. It feels like a problem with your life. It feels like the world has become grey, like nothing is as interesting as it used to be. Like you have lost the capacity for genuine enthusiasm that you once had, though you cannot remember exactly when it disappeared or why. This is the most insidious cost of the trap. It does not announce itself. It simply erases the color from your experience so gradually that you do not notice until you are already living in a world that feels flat and motivationally inert, and you have forgotten what it felt like when it was not. The second cost is the collapse of deep attention. The human capacity for sustained, focused, uninterrupted cognitive engagement, what the author Cal Newport has called deep work, is not a fixed biological constant. It is a skill. Like any skill, it is built through practice and lost through disuse. The dopamine trap systematically destroys this capacity. Every notification interrupts a period of sustained attention. Every compulsive check of the phone breaks the neural thread of concentrated thought. Every switch between tasks, the scrolling, the checking, the brief consumption of disconnected fragments of content, trains the brain away from depth and toward the perpetual management of surface-level stimulation. Neuroscience research on attention has documented what practitioners have known intuitively for years. After a single interruption, the average person requires more than 20 minutes to fully restore the depth of focus they had before the interruption occurred. Most people in the modern attention environment are interrupted far more frequently than once every 20 minutes. The result is a brain that has lost the muscular memory of depth, that reaches for distraction automatically the moment genuine difficulty or sustained effort is required, that interprets the discomfort of concentration, the normal friction of doing hard cognitive work, as a signal to seek relief, rather than a signal that important work is being done. And here is the cost that this produces. The work that matters most in a human life, the creative work, the analytical work, the relational work that requires full presence and sustained engagement, requires exactly this capacity that the trap has been systematically eroding. The person caught in the dopamine trap is not just losing hours to their phone. They are losing the cognitive architecture required to build anything of genuine significance with the hours they have. The third cost is perhaps the most personal. The trap erodes your relationship with your own interior life. The human mind, left in silence without stimulation, does not simply go blank. It generates, it processes, It integrates the unresolved fragments of experience that have been accumulating beneath the surface of daily awareness. It makes connections between ideas. It surfaces emotions that have been waiting for the space to be felt. It does the quiet, invisible work of becoming, of moving the person forward in their understanding of themselves and their world. This process requires silence. It requires the tolerance of boredom, the willingness to sit with the discomfort of an unstimulated mind long enough for the deeper processing to begin. The dopamine trap has made silence unbearable. The moment the mind is not occupied, the moment there is a pause in activity, a gap in conversation, a few seconds of empty time, the hand moves to the phone before any conscious decision has been made. The silence is filled before the processing can begin. The interior work is perpetually interrupted. The deeper self is perpetually avoided. The person who cannot tolerate silence cannot know themselves, and the person who does not know themselves cannot build a life that genuinely belongs to them, because they are making every significant choice from a surface-level understanding of who they are, without access to the deeper knowing that stillness alone can provide. Chapter 4. The biology of recovery. What happens when you stop? The dopamine system is not permanently damaged. This is the most important thing to understand before we talk about the path forward. The neurological changes produced by chronic overstimulation, the down-regulation of receptors, the reduced baseline, the collapsed attention span, are not fixed. They are not structural damage in the way that a physical injury is structural. They are adaptive changes, and what adapted in one direction can adapt back. The brain's ability to reorganize itself in response to changed conditions is called neuroplasticity, and it is the biological foundation of everything that follows. When the dopamine system is given a period of reduced artificial stimulation, when the constant flood of variable reward is removed and the brain is allowed to exist in a quieter, more natural signal environment, the process of downregulation begins to reverse. The dopamine receptors that reduced in number and sensitivity during the period of overstimulation begin, gradually and measurably, to upregulate. They become more numerous. They become more sensitive. The baseline rises. What was grey begins to acquire color again. What was flat begins to acquire texture. The book that felt impossibly boring after 6 months of algorithmic content begins to feel genuinely engaging. The conversation that felt insufficient compared to the stimulation of the feed begins to feel nourishing and real. The capacity for sustained attention, that deep cognitive muscle, begins to return slowly through the same mechanism by which any atrophied muscle returns, through use. This process has a name in popular culture. It is called a dopamine fast or a dopamine detox. These terms are imprecise. You cannot fast from a naturally occurring neurochemical, but they point at a real and documented phenomenon. What the research shows is this. The brain requires a period of reduced artificial stimulation in order to recalibrate its dopamine system to a more natural baseline. The duration of this period varies depending on the depth and duration of the overstimulation, but the consistent finding across studies of addiction recovery, screen use reduction, and attentional rehabilitation is that meaningful neurological change begins within days of reduced stimulation and continues progressively over weeks and months. The discomfort of the early period is real and should be expected. When the artificial dopamine triggers are removed, the brain initially responds with the signal of their absence, the below baseline drop that Schultz documented in his primates when the predicted reward failed to arrive. In practical terms, this means restlessness, irritability, a pervasive sense that something is missing, a pulling, insistent urge to reach for the phone, to check the feed, to return to the stimulus. This is not weakness. This is the trapped dopamine system expressing its conditioning, and it passes. Within 48 to 72 hours of genuine reduction in artificial stimulation, the initial withdrawal signal begins to quiet. The restlessness decreases, the pulling diminishes, and in its place, slowly, tentatively, like light returning after a long overcast period, the natural world begins to register again. The taste of food becomes more interesting. The texture of a physical environment becomes more noticeable. The face of another person becomes more legible, more present, more alive with information. The brain is recalibrating. The signal-to-noise ratio is improving. The natural rewards that were always available, that were simply too subtle to register above the noise of artificial stimulation, begin to come back into range. Chapter 5. The Exit Architecture. How to actually get out. The exit from the dopamine trap is not a single decision. If it were, you would have made it already. Every person caught in the trap has made the decision many times, has felt the clarity of seeing what the pattern is costing them, has resolved to change, and has found themselves back on the phone within hours or days without quite knowing how they got there. This is not a failure of character. It is a misunderstanding of the mechanism. A single decision engages the prefrontal cortex, the executive, rational mind. But the prefrontal cortex, as we established in the first chapter, is slower and less neurologically powerful than the mesolimbic craving system it is trying to govern. In the moment of the craving, when the urge fires and the hand moves, the prefrontal decision is simply outrun. The exit requires a different strategy, not willpower applied in the moment of temptation, architecture applied before the moment of temptation arrives. The first element of the exit architecture is environmental redesign. The single most reliable predictor of whether a person will engage in a habitual behavior is not their motivation or their intentions. It is the proximity of the trigger. Research on habit formation consistently shows that behavior follows environment more reliably than it follows intention. When the phone is on the desk, it will be checked. When the social media app is on the home screen, it will be opened. When the notification is permitted to appear, it will be responded to. The exit begins not with a decision about how you will respond to triggers, but with the removal of the triggers themselves. Delete the applications that serve no purpose except the delivery of variable reward. This is not a dramatic act, it is a logical one. You do not keep a slot machine in your bedroom and rely on your willpower to avoid playing it. You remove the slot machine, move the phone to a different room during the hours designated for deep work, for meals, for the first and last 30 minutes of each day. Physical distance is more reliable than digital willpower. Turn off every notification that does not require an immediate response. The notification system is a designed interruption mechanism. It was built to pull you into the app at the moment that the algorithm determines you are most likely to engage. You did not ask for this service. You do not have to accept it. The second element is the deliberate cultivation of high-quality dopamine experiences. The goal of recalibration is not the permanent suppression of the dopamine system. That would not be possible, and it would not be desirable. Dopamine is the engine of human motivation. The goal is to redirect it away from the artificial, low-effort, high-frequency triggers of the attention economy and toward the natural, effort-requiring, genuinely satisfying rewards that the system was designed to process. Physical exercise is the most powerful of these redirections. Exercise produces a profound and well-documented effect on the dopamine system, not just through the immediate release of the neurochemical, but through the long-term upregulation of dopamine receptors that consistent physical training produces. The person who exercises regularly is not simply healthier, they are more dopaminergically sensitive, more capable of experiencing genuine motivation and satisfaction from the natural rewards of their environment. Deep creative or intellectual work produces a dopamine response that the scroll can never replicate, not in intensity but in duration and in the secondary rewards it generates. The completion of something difficult and real produces a satisfaction that is structurally different from the hollow pleasure of the variable reward loop. It does not leave you wanting more immediately. It leaves you with a sense of having actually arrived somewhere. Genuine human connection, not the mediated, performance-oriented interaction of social media, but the face-to-face, fully present encounter with another person, activates the dopamine system in concert with the oxytocin and serotonin systems in a way that no digital product can replicate. The social reward circuits of the brain were not built for likes and comments. They were built for this. The third element is the practice of deliberate boredom. This is the intervention that the overstimulated mind resists most fiercely, and it is also the one that produces the most profound results. Boredom is not an absence. It is a neurological state with a specific and important function. It is the brain's signal that the current environment is not providing sufficient stimulation to occupy full capacity, and that internal resources should therefore be redirected toward the generation of novel ideas, the processing of unresolved material, and the deepening of self-knowledge. Every major creative breakthrough in human history was preceded by a period of apparent inactivity. A walk, a bath, a stare out of a window, a night of incomplete sleep, in which the unconscious mind continued working on what the conscious mind had set down. The dopamine trap has eliminated boredom from modern life, and in doing so, it has eliminated the conditions under which the deepest human thinking occurs. Deliberately reintroduce it. Sit without your phone. Walk without headphones. Wait without scrolling. Let the mind wander. Let it be uncomfortable. Let it reach for the stimulation that is not there, and then let it find, slowly and surprisingly, that it can generate its own. Chapter 6. The Life on the Other Side. What recovery actually looks like. There is a reason this chapter comes last, because the life on the other side of the dopamine trap cannot be fully imagined from inside it. The down-regulated brain, the brain whose baseline has been lowered by years of artificial stimulation, does not have access to the full range of its own experience. It cannot remember, with any real vividness, what it felt like to be genuinely absorbed in a book for 3 hours, to finish a piece of work and feel the deep and quiet satisfaction of something real completed, to sit with another person in unmediated presence and feel the full weight and texture of their humanity. These things sound pleasant in the abstract. They do not feel urgent. They do not compete, in the moment of craving, with the immediate and reliable pull of the screen. But the research and the testimony of every person who has walked through the exit architecture and stayed long enough for the recalibration to occur describes something consistent and remarkable: the return of genuine interest, not the feverish, compulsive pseudo-interest of the dopamine trap, that sense of needing to check, needing to know, needing to see what comes next, but the quiet, self-sustaining curiosity of a mind that has found something it genuinely wants to understand, the kind of interest that does not need to be fed by an algorithm because it generates its own fuel. The return of patience, the capacity to remain present with a process that unfolds slowly, a conversation, a project, a relationship, a season, without the compulsive need to skip ahead or check what else is available. The return of the self. This is the one that people who have made the transition describe most consistently and most emotionally. The sense of coming back to something that was always there but had been drowned out. A quieter, more continuous, more authentically personal experience of being alive, less reactive, less driven by external signals, more genuinely in possession of one's own attention and one's own time. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He did not know about dopamine. He did not know about variable reward schedules or algorithmic feeds or the neuroscience of anticipation. But he understood something that neuroscience has since confirmed in precise molecular detail. The human being who cannot be alone with themselves is a human being who has lost access to the most important resource they possess. The dopamine trap was built on exactly this vulnerability. The exit is the recovery of exactly this capacity. You came to this audiobook as someone who already knew something was wrong, not because you were told, because you felt it, in the distracted quality of your attention, in the hollow feeling that followed a long session of scrolling, in the creeping awareness that the hours were passing and the life that mattered most was happening somewhere just out of reach. That feeling was accurate. It was not anxiety, it was not weakness, it was your own intelligence working beneath the noise of the trap, trying to tell you what had been taken. Now you know the mechanism. You know that dopamine is not pleasure, it is anticipation. You know that the trap was built on variable reward, on the same principle that makes slot machines impossible to walk away from. You know that the cost of chronic overstimulation is not just wasted time but a lowered baseline, a collapsed attention span, and a severed connection to your own interior life. And you know the exit is not willpower, it is architecture. It is the deliberate redesign of your environment, the patient recultivation of natural reward, and the radical reintroduction of the silence that the trap was specifically built to eliminate. The dopamine system was not your enemy. It was your most powerful biological asset, the engine of every meaningful thing a human being has ever built, created, pursued, or become. It was stolen from you. Now you know how to take it back. The trap ends today, not with a resolution, not with a dramatic gesture, with understanding. And understanding, applied consistently, is the only thing that has ever changed anything that mattered. Begin.